My name is Carlos Moncada. I'm Director of Client Services at InfoReady. You may have heard my voice on these before. We may have even met before. I do want to thank you for taking the time to meet on this Peer Spotlight webinar today about managing human subjects research reviews. So our guest panelist today is Tiffany Hamblin from Eastern Kentucky University. She's been gracious enough to share what her process is like. And I would say that these Peer Spotlight webinars are a great way to see how colleagues at other institutions use InfoReady within the context of their broader operations, programs, and processes. So it's a nice insight into how other people are using it. We always get that question, like, oh, how are other people using it? And, a lot of times we're regurgitating what we hear from other people. It's great to hear it straight from the source. So next slide, Rhonda, please. And so on this page, we have a list of different use cases. Now, IRB and compliance processes I would say they're an uncommon use case for InfoReady. It's not typically what an organization is buying InfoReady for, right? It's not the primary use case. However, as we've seen hundreds of times in the past, InfoReady, because it's a flexible tool, can be set up as a solution for a wide variety of needs. And Tiffany and EKU are an example of that, right? They were using it to manage other processes, and she's so good with the system. I'm telling you, like she figured out, hey, this is how we can set up different forms in InfoReady. She's going to tell you that story and how they do it. I've always been so impressed with the way she's done it too, and she's been so gracious with also connecting with other admins at other institutions in the past. Now we're just broadcasting it out for all of you. And so you can see the other use cases here as well. Many of these are much more common. If you ever wanted to have a list of all the use cases and processes people use InfoReady for, we'd be glad to share that with you after the webinar. And next, I also want to talk about just the logistics of what the webinar is going to be. So it's scheduled for 60 minutes, and the bulk of that is going to be Tiffany going over her process. We're also going to have quite a bit of time for Q&A from the audience. We had some questions submitted. I have some of my own questions as well, and we'll go from there. If you do have a question you think of during the webinar, please submit that using the Q&A feature, because the phones are muted. It's a way for us to kind of control the chaos of everyone being unmuted. Rhonda launched a poll question already. We also have a post-webinar survey that will launch right after you exit the webinar in a new browser tab. And then next slide, please. Just a little bit about Tiffany. Give a little background on her bio for her as an intro. So she's the Associate Director of Sponsored Programs at Eastern Kentucky University. She's been the admin since they got it, InfoReady admin since they got InfoReady. So experience with the system for sure. And she gave me this bio to read out. Tiffany's professional career began at a public school system where she developed a love of grant proposal writing and a passion for creating opportunities for disadvantaged students. That's really noble, by the way. She moved into higher education in 2005 and serves as the Associate Director in the Office of Sponsored Programs at Eastern Kentucky University. She values opportunities to support faculty and staff in their pursuits of funding for programs that provide transformative experiences for students. She is grateful for InfoReady Review as a tool to support her work and the intuitive user experience the system offers to faculty, staff, and students. That was a great bio. I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany Hamblin now. She's going to share her screen and go go over how EKU manages human-centered research. Thanks,
Thank
Tiffany.
you. Thank you, Carlos. So I am going to kind of start with sharing a little bit about our goals when we first began to implement InfoReady for this use. And then I want to walk you all through one of our setups. I'm going to use an expedited review application as an example, show you kind of how the grids look, how our routing steps are set up and things like that. And then I want to talk a little bit about some of the limitations that we see and some ways around that. And then end with just some advice for things that you might want to think about as you move forward with implementing on your own. So looking forward to answering questions at the end as well. So we purchased InfoReady way back in 2016. So we've had it for quite a while. And right away, we knew it was going to be a really fantastic tool for us. And so we wanted to, the IRB process was something that was really cumbersome for our investigators. And so very early on, we really wanted to find a way to use the system for that purpose. And so our goals with that process were, first of all, to simplify the application process for our investigators. So a big part of that was how they go about getting applications to us. And so so originally we were doing like, printing out your documents, signing them, getting signatures, and sending them through campus mail. And then in around 2008, we were able to develop a form just based on our website where investigators could submit directly through our website, but it was still that hard copy process that they were scanning and sending. So we really wanted to eliminate all of those signatures in the process of, someone having to walk around campus and get people to sign their applications. And then if there were adjustments that needed to be made, that process started all over again. So it was just that signature process, and being able to take care of that electronically was a huge selling point for us with InfoReady. We also wanted to reduce the effort for reviewers. So our applications for expedited or exemption reviews were assigned kind of on a rotating basis to IRB members, and they were responsible for receiving those review assignments by email and then navigating that process with the investigator. So if there were changes needed, they would request them and get the revisions, and then all that feedback was happening by email. And so it was kind of cumbersome just to keep up with what reviews you had outstanding, and the records management for that was challenging. So our IRB administrator would actually take care of the filing, and so she would print out all the correspondence and all the documents, and then we would maintain hard copy files for those. And so it just wasn't something that was very 21st century at that point. So we really wanted to improve that process. And then also that management and accessibility of records. So if a department chair, for example, signed off on an application, they would normally want to make a copy of that, keep it in their office, or they wouldn't really care about it, and so they would just sign it and move on. But there was no way for them to get access to what they had signed off on. So InfoReady made it really easy for anyone to just go into their reviews tab in their account and access all the documents that are related to anything that they've approved in the past. And so that was a really important feature for us as well. We also wanted to increase the efficiency for the IRB administrator, and we only have one at EKU. And so it can be cumbersome at times, even still, because of some of the back and forth with the investigators. But overall, the process is just so much more smooth for her. And so that was also a major reason that we wanted to do this. And then the last reason had to do with the fact that everything else that we were receiving as submissions to our office, things like internal review processes for external grants, internal grant competitions, budget revisions, all the different processes that we were managing, all of those were in InfoReady. And so we really wanted that consistency so that anyone who was going to submit something to our office would just automatically know this is how it's going to be done, and they would know exactly where to go and what that process would look like once they started it. And so those were some of our goals for that implementation. And what we ended up doing is creating like a whole category of submissions just for the Institutional Review Board. And so this is our landing page for InfoReady Review. It's linked from all the pages on our website as one of our header menu options, actually. And so when someone comes here, they're going to see lots of different options, but those can be easily filtered into institutional review board options. And so you can see here, we're using this for limited review, expedited review, full review. We're also using it for continuing reviews and revisions, and even for authorization or reliance agreements when needed. So we're pretty much doing everything IRB related in the system. So I'm going to show you an application for expedited review and walk through that whole process of what that looks like start to finish. I chose that one because I think it's the most broad. It has all the different components of how we do things on a day-to-day basis. So someone who comes here to apply would just click on that link from that previous slide, and then this is what they would see. So on our actual website for our office, we have step-by-step instructions for how the IRB process works. And so like step 1 is complete training. Step 2 is classify the research under the categories. Step 3 is complete the application materials. And then step 4 is submit the application materials. And that's what brings them over to InfoReady. And so they're going to see instructions here for that actual submission process. It tells them, what to do, how to log in, what's required for the application, and all of that sort of information. And then they will click the apply button over on the right, and that will take them to a screen that looks like this. So we kind of have the application itself divided into 4 sections, which really are the standard InfoReady sections. So at the beginning, we have, the basic contact information. We've edited that just a little bit from the default settings in InfoReady, made some things required or not even included. And then we've also added a new section there where we ask the investigators to choose their role. So we want to know if they're faculty, staff, or students. And then the second section is where they're going to put in their title, and that's also a required field for InfoReady. If it's a student, we ask for the name of their faculty research advisor, and then we also ask for the department chair name. There is a place for notes and comments there if those are needed, but that's an optional field. And then at the bottom of this screenshot, you can see we have status, approval date, and expiration date. So these are fields that we have added to the application and marked them for IRB use only. And we'll talk a little bit later about reporting, but the reason that information is there is so that when we go to download reports, those fields will be there. And so we can, identify the applications that are getting ready to expire and things like that. And then the third section of the application is where files will be uploaded. So we start with the application form. We opted to use a form for this process versus actually creating fields for all the different components of the application. And the reason for that is because there is almost always changes that are needed from the time that an application is submitted and then reviewed by an IRB member until it's approved. So normally the IRB member will have something that they want changed. And since we can't reopen the applications to let the applicant make those changes, we opted to use a form for this that they can update on their own and then return to us by email. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, but I just kind of wanted to explain why we have it set up that way at this stage. Then we also asked them to attach their city documentation. And then we actually have 8 other attachment fields. InfoReady limits you to 10 fields, and so we're using all of those. That's normally enough, but sometimes we will have investigators who have more files than 10, and so we offer to combine those and put them, into groups that make a little bit of sense. And so we actually have other attachment 1 through 8 there, even though you can only see 2 here. So this is where the investigators would attach their recruitment materials, their data collection instruments, consent forms, all the different components that would go in as attachments to their application. And so those would just be attached. We ask them to use names that are reflective of what's actually in the file, like name the consent form, and things like that. Investigators don't always follow those instructions, but we can edit that so we can make that a little bit more clear for reviewers if we want to. And then the final section is just the certification, and then they will click submit. So for the certification, we ask them to confirm that they've read the policy, agree to follow it. They're going to get approval for any changes that might be needed and things like that. So you can edit all of that text. You don't have to have a certification, but since we're using this in place of a signature, we felt it was really important to have that. So you have a lot of flexibility within InfoReady to edit everything you see here. You can put attachments. Excuse me. You can put attachments that your investigators will download and then complete and then re-upload. You can make your instructions as custom as you want to, call those fields anything that you want. So there's a whole lot of flexibility within these sections. So this is a chart or a step-by-step graphic to illustrate what happens once an application is submitted. So these are the things that our administrator does, and I'm going to walk through all of these processes in more detail, but just to kind of demonstrate. So she will receive a submission, an application, and then she'll review it and make a determination whether it's going to be accepted or returned to the investigator. So that will take her in different places, whether it's accepted, straight on to reviewer assignments or whether it goes back. So a really nice feature of InfoReady is that if something is wrong with the submission when you first receive it, maybe it's incomplete, it's missing files, things like that, then you can return it to the submitter and they can make those updates and resubmit. And so I really love that feature. And once something gets submitted, resubmitted, then the administrator will see that and then kind of go back up to that same process. But then once it's accepted, you're ready to move on to the assignment of reviewers. And so that could start with the faculty advisor, or it could start with the department chair. But then once it gets those initial approvals, then it gets assigned to a committee member, an IRB committee member. And so then you might get an approval where you're going to go straight on to process that approval, or you might receive a disapproval, and in which case you would need to communicate those changes to the investigator, replace the files and add communication in the file, then reassign the reviewer, and that process could continue as many times as it needs to. So I'm going to show you all of that in a lot of detail now. So in this example, we received an application that was missing the city training. And it had an informed consent form that wasn't based on the template that we require. And so in this case, she would have just clicked return submission from the actual application. And then that would show the return application here at the top. And then you can see in this box below, we just edit. So we have like this, everything except what you see in this box is set up through our notifications options within the competition. But we would just adjust this language for each application to say exactly what's wrong with it and what needs to be taken care of before they resubmit. So that's a really easy process to do. And then once it's resubmitted, or sometimes it's perfect when it comes in, and so then you would just click accept. You would see the accept application here at the top. And for our purposes, we don't change anything in the notification. We have this set up to say, this is the next step in the process. If you're a student, this will happen. And so we don't make any edits there. We just click accept and send. And then the next step is to assign the reviewers. So if it is a student, we assign the application to the faculty advisor. So if you guys are using InfoReady already, you know that you're just going to click assign reviewer, assign the reviewer through that process. And if you don't need that step, you're just going to click the box to skip that routing step. One thing that is a little bit of a limitation, I feel like, is that nothing except that first review step generates an automatic email that lets you really customize the text. Everything after the first routing step will generate the digest email. And so after you assign that reviewer, you're going to have them come up right here, and you'll have a little box that will say resend request. Or maybe it just says resend, and you'll click on that to make it go to them immediately. Otherwise, they're not going to see that until they get the new digest, which isn't only sent out a couple of times a week. So just kind of be cognizant of that. And also that the language that goes with that second routing step is a digest format. And so it's not going to be as clear to your reviewers at that stage as it would have been in the first step. And so sometimes you need to reach out to them to say, you know, this isn't spam. I really assigned this to you. Just want to make sure you saw it or something like that. That's usually not a problem with the department chair step because they're usually reviewing multiple applications. And so they just kind of know the process. But sometimes you might have a new faculty advisor or a new department chair sometimes who you might want to reach out to individually for that. So once you have both of those reviews completed, then you want to go over to the IRB. And I have 3 rounds here on the screenshot, but we actually have 5 set up because, believe it or not, sometimes it takes 5 tries to get something approved. And so you can actually have as many as you want. So you can add more than 5 if you need it, but 5 was good for us. We often use 3, but we hardly ever use 4 or 5, but we do have all of those rounds set up. And so same thing as with the routing step 2, once you assign the reviewer, make sure that you're clicking that resend or they're not going to see that review assignment until they get the next digest email. So the reviewer form, so this is what an IRB committee member would see when they go in to review the application. So they're going to be able to access all the files that you saw as the administrator, and then they'll have an option here to click whether they approve or don't approve. And so we have in bold here, if changes are necessary, please don't approve. Instead, we ask them to provide a detailed list of the changes that are needed in order to get approval. So every now and then we'll have a brand new committee member who will click I approve, but then put a list of things that they want changed. And so we can't do that. We need it to be, if you approve it, it has to be just as it is. So we can't have changes after the approval. So we do ask them to be careful about that. And we do a new IRB member orientation meeting when someone new is appointed to the committee, and we go through all of this with them. And so normally we don't have that issue at all. So here is one of the less perfect functions of this process. And this is that when you get something that's not approved, there's not a way in InfoReady to open it back up so that the investigator can make the changes and then resubmit, because you've already accepted it and started that routing process. And so at this point, the only person who can edit the submission is the administrator. And so you want to come out of the system and send an email to the investigator. And so we have a template for that I have here, but it basically just says the IRB has reviewed it and here's some things that you need to take care of. And so then we have a list and that goes in the email. The IRB member is copied, and the faculty advisor is also copied if it's a student. And so the student or the faculty or staff investigator will make those changes and then send them back to the IRB administrator. And so once she receives that, she will go in and edit the application. And so we actually replace the files that are different. So let's say in that previous example, these are the files over on the left here that were in the original submission. And so then there was a recruitment materials document that the IRB member wanted changed. And then there was also a demographic form that they wanted some edits to. And so we renamed those files, mark them with revised and the date, and re-upload them. This center part here is the actual application. So we re-upload those. And then we also attach the correspondence. So the email between the administrator and the investigator gets printed to a PDF file and gets uploaded as well. And so you can see over on the right, these are the new documents that are added. And so we just switch those out. So the old recruitment materials file is no longer there. It's replaced with the one that needs to be reviewed this time. And so then we go to a round 2 review. And so the review screen that I showed you a few minutes ago, this is just the round 2. It's actually routing step 3 or 4 for our process, but we have some template language that will automatically come there. And then we also edit that for that specific situation. And so in this case, it tells them 4 files have been updated in response to your previous feedback and are marked as revised. And then the correspondence is there too. And we added the correspondence not initially when we implemented, but we added that a little bit later because we found that it was really helpful for the reviewer to be able to see what they said last time. So the last time that they reviewed it, they had these issues, and that makes it easy for them to go back and see if those issues were resolved. And they can also get that through the review tab, but they have to go back to their previous reviews to do it. So if it's right there on the screen when they're reviewing the application, it just makes it easier for them. And so that also is a good way for us to document the correspondence because we're not saving those in hard copy files any longer. So this is what the review grid looks like. If you're using that, you can kind of see all the different steps here across the top, and then we can see if there's anything that's outstanding, or if someone didn't approve, you can see all that very easily right there from the grid. There's also the review status. If you're just looking at the basic grid from InfoReady instead of the review grid specifically, you can see the status easily from there. But one thing to pay attention to, if you're using that to monitor where things are in the process, is that if something is in the reviewed status, it could mean that it needs administrator attention, or it could mean that the administrator received the review and has reached out to the investigator and is waiting for something. And so if you use another tracking system, then that's somewhere where you might be able to monitor that if you have a large number of protocols. We usually don't have so many that you just, you can almost kind of remember where everything is in the process. So then once you get an approval, and that previous process that I just talked about might go on for several weeks, several days, and it just depends on how quickly people respond to those requests for adjustments. But once an approval comes in, we have this template text. This is set up under notifications within the competition itself. So it has our FWA and all the information that needs to go out to the investigator. And we just add a few things here. We add the protocol number in the subject line, and then we add the expiration date within the body of the email. And we also attach a copy of the stamped consent form. So we use a digital stamp now, where we're just putting an image on to the PDF file that's saved as the consent form. And we're putting in the protocol number and the expiration date. And so that goes back to the investigator, telling them, use this copy when you enroll subjects in your study. And that's also saved within the InfoReady application as well. So once you have processed the approval, you'll see at the top of the application, it will tell you when the person was made an awardee. That language is a little bit weird, but no one really sees that except the administrator. So as long as they understand that awardee in this case means approval for an IRB protocol, that's not an issue. It's not something that bothers us at all, but it is important that you kind of make clear to your administrator, if it's not you, what that actually means. And then we also edit to add the status, which we update to show as active, and add the approval date and the expiration date. And as I mentioned earlier, those fields are there to help with reporting. So your post-award grid that you can look at in InfoReady can be customized. If you click on the columns link, at the top there, you'll see the standard categories. You can select which of those you want to have included. And then over on additional, you'll have options for some of your custom fields. So this is where it's really useful for us to have the approval date, the expiration date, and the status. We use the approval date to be sure that we can notify people when their annual continuing review is up if needed. And then expiration date, of course, helps us to notify them of progress reports and, just make sure we know what's active and what's not at any given time. And then the post-award grid also looks like this, where you can monitor once you've set those settings from the previous slide. This is what it will look like. So you can see we have the expiration date, the approval date, all of that information that we just checked on that other slide. You can see all of that information here. And so just from a very quick glance here, the 2 reports that were already due have been submitted, but then this third one that was due is overdue. And so this kind of flags our attention to this one, and we can reach out to that investigator to say, hey, where's your final report? So that's a really useful screen to look at. So speaking of reports, here's what we do for report assignments. We require a final report for all applications that are approved through expedited or full review. And so what we do is we have the template for reporting set up so that it's talking about what needs to happen because your application or your study will no longer be under approval status in 30 days. And so if you need to extend this, please submit a revision request for an extension. So we have some of that kind of language for the initial reminder. So we set that initial reminder to send a month before the protocol expires. Our actual reports aren't due until 30 days after expiration, but we send a 30-day before expiration reminder in case they need to do a revision. And so the only things that we really do here are to set the dates, the due date and the date that we want it sent. And then we also add the protocol number in the subject line. And that's helpful for investigators if they have multiple studies. It just kind of flags for them which study it's about. The title actually is a form field that is populated for you automatically if you put in the coding for it. But then we do need to add the date for expiration because the dates that are in the progress report function tell you when to send it and when it's due, but it doesn't tell you when the actual protocol expires. And so we use that date there as well. So just takes a couple minutes to set those up. And then if you want to do additional reminders, you can do those within the system directly. You're just going to click on progress report reminders and then click the little edit button, the little pencil icon, and then you can add the dates, change the dates, delete them if a report is submitted before the reminder goes out. So you have a lot of flexibility there. One thing that we do a little bit differently because we only have one IRB administrator, and so it's not super important that everyone who might be involved has access to what report reminders are going out. So we also have some email templates, like if somebody has an overdue report, we would just email them and say, hey, your report's overdue. And then we have the detailed step-by-step instructions for how they can go into the system to submit that report. So you can really do that either way. Our progress report or final report is pretty straightforward. We have the current status, how many subjects were enrolled, whether anyone withdrew from the study, any adverse events or unanticipated problems that weren't reported, and then the date. And then we also have a section if they have results from the study, like a summary. Sometimes it's a thesis for a student or a dissertation. It might be a journal article. So whatever format those results are in, we just ask for them to upload a copy. And that's not required if there aren't any results that are publishable at that point. So we're almost finished here. Just a couple more things. Reporting from within. So just from the grid for your competition, you can just select the reporting option. You'll have the little box that comes up. And I usually choose application and applicant details, all fields for this one, because I don't really have a reason to need the raw review data or really anything about how that review process looked. I'm just looking for some data on the application and its status. And so this is why we include those fields like the expiration date and approval date and things like that within our actual application, because this allows us to pull out reports that reflect those fields. And so just think about what data you want in your report and make sure that you have that in an application field, whether it's something that the investigator fills out or something that's for your use only. So a few limitations for us and how we kind of overcome those. So I mentioned earlier that applications can't be reopened for edits. So that truly is something that I would love to see changed at some point in the future, but we definitely can make that work just by coming out of the system and doing that process electronically through email. So it's still not a cumbersome process, and it's not that hard to go in and make the updates, replace the files and things like that. So that's how we manage that process. You do want to make sure, because your email correspondence does need to be saved for the records. And so if you aren't documenting that somehow within the system, make sure that you're doing it somewhere else. And so for us, we print the emails to PDF and upload them directly into the application. The language not matching the purpose is not a big deal to me at all. But if you have a lot of different investigators or a lot of different administrators who maybe haven't used the system, that might be something that you really need to explain to them, just to make sure that they understand what those terms mean in this particular context. The review status can be a little bit unclear if you're looking at it in that main grid. So just think about if it's reviewed, it could mean a couple of different things. And then like it'll say approved or awarded. So awarded means the same thing as approved. And so one good way to overcome really all of these challenges is to keep a separate tracking spreadsheet or a database where you're kind of tracking everything as you go and you know the status of everything. And you can populate that spreadsheet very easily by downloading the fields from your competition on a regular basis. And so that's, we do like protocol action forms where we send out notifications to all the committee members for everything that took place that wasn't in a full review setting, so that they know what applications were approved and what's been closed out and things like that. So we use that reporting function to populate those spreadsheets, and it's very easy to do. So a few implementation tips if you want to go down this route for your IRB processes. First of all, really can't emphasize enough how important it is to get people involved. You know, share your vision for that change process that you're about to embark upon, and value the opinions of people who are actually doing the work. And so I know in some cases it's only you in the office, but if you have an IRB administrator or other staff who support that person, get them involved. IRB members, they should also be involved in figuring out what the process should look like. Nobody likes to be told, here's a new system, here's what we're going to do, go for it. They want to be involved in that process and be able to make contributions. And so I definitely encourage you to do that. Instead of just throwing what you already have into the system, I also encourage you to review everything about your whole IRB process. Look at all of your forms, think about what revisions you might want to make to those. Think about requirements, if there's anything new you need to add, anything that maybe really isn't necessary that you can take out. Look at instructions for all of your forms and processes and make sure that they're clear. Take time to really make them as functional as you can. And then think about your processes. Are you doing things that maybe aren't necessary or that someone else could do versus the person doing it currently? Just really take the time to think about it as a whole process and what might make it better beyond just putting it into an electronic format. You also want very clear instructions. So I think InfoReady is probably the most intuitive system there is for doing things like this. Like, it's so easy to just click and, you know, walk through the process and know what to do. But there's always people who aren't comfortable with new technology or just are resistant to change overall. And so if you can give them step-by-step details, I suggest doing it with screenshots even, so that they'll know exactly what to expect when they go in to do an application. That makes it a whole lot easier for people to apply. And then also for your reviewers, I mentioned we do an orientation for new IRB members, and InfoReady has a place within that orientation where we're walking them through that whole process, what the reviewer screen looks like, what kind of feedback they need to give, and all of those sorts of things. Testing is also so important. Once you set up your competition, InfoReady might not like this because they have to delete applications manually, but I think it's so important to do some just testing out applications. Have whoever set up the competition have someone else go in and try it out, submit just a dummy application, and then assign it to reviewers. Have somebody review them, like do that whole process and see what's working well, what might need to have some adjustments. Make sure everything looks okay, like your approval email at the end. You want to make sure that that's very clean, all your font matches and things like that, because that approval document usually gets sent places and sometimes even published within like a dissertation or something. So make sure it looks good and just kind of go through that whole process to see what adjustments you need to make. Be very broad with your communication plan so that everyone on campus will know about the change. You might start with your IRB members, have them sort of spread the word within their departments. You might take something to Dean's Council where all the deans find out about the change coming. We have at EKU a publication that comes out every morning called EKU Today that's just kind of announcements for faculty and staff. And so we would publish in there several times to let them know the change is coming and then now that it's live. And so just whatever avenues you have to communicate, I think that's really, really important. I also suggest hosting some virtual demonstration sessions. You could also do these in person if you wanted, but just a place where people can come who want to know what the process looks like. Show them how to open the system, how to submit an application, talk about what happens once they do that, just that whole process to help people feel more comfortable with the change. And then lastly, flexibility. Flexibility is so key. And InfoReady is awesome in that you aren't married to an application once you launch it. So you can go in and edit all of your applications while they're live. So if you roll something out and 30 days in you find I really wish we had added this field, then all you have to do is open that up and edit the competition, and then that's going to take effect within that live competition without messing up what you already have in the system. And so just be flexible and know that you have that option and that you can make adjustments as you go, and don't feel like just because you rolled it out in one way that it can never change. So that is all that I have, and I am happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Thanks so much, Tiffany. That was a great overview. Really, I think really helpful walkthrough of your process. We do have some questions. Before we get into questions, I do want to add one quick item.
Okay.
Tiffany mentioned testing, launching the competition, running applications, and doing reviews. We process delete requests all the time. Other people doing similar things. We're perfectly all right doing that.
Good.
we are happy that people take the time to test. So all good from our end.
Awesome.
All right, so we have some questions that have come in. So first, do you keep one competition up forever, or do you reopen a new one periodically to manage the protocol and application volume and reporting? The additional context here is, since IRB protocols can stay active for years, I'm curious how you manage that.
That is a very good question. So we are actually dealing with this right now. So our desire originally was to keep one competition that was active forever. But what we found is that when you hit about 500 or so applications, the grid is really slow to load. And I have one competition that I'm using right now for a different purpose that has 893, I think, applications. And it is a little bit cumbersome to load all of that data into the grid, understandably, for sure. And so we have decided to create a new competition that will start at the new fiscal year. Unless you archive a competition, you can still use it, even if it's not live for new applications. And so you might want to do one per fiscal year and then just leave it. So it's not live for people to apply to because your expiration date has expired or your application date has expired, but your administrator can still go in and do everything. So people can still file their reports and things like that in a competition that's no longer live. And so what I think I would suggest is maybe doing it by your fiscal year.
Great point. And if you do that, there's a copy button on every competition. So you click copy, you edit the title slightly to remove copy of blank, and then you put the new date in and you can launch right away, right there.
Yes, we've done that for some competitions, and that's amazing. Like, you don't have to redo your notification settings or anything like that. Everything's just exactly like it was. That's definitely an awesome feature.
Agreed. People were definitely happy when we introduced that.
Yes, I was for sure.
So here's another question. It sounds like this has a lot of manual copy and pasting. Is that correct? Is that a correct assessment?
So not really. Almost everything you can do one time, setting it up under your notifications, and you don't have to worry about it ever again because it's there. You can still go in and edit as you want, but it's not something that you have to change each time. The only thing that is pretty heavy with copy and pasting is when you have review results that come in that are not approved. And so you have an IRB committee member who's giving you a list of things, you would have to copy and paste that into an email to send back to the investigator. But that's the main time that you would do any copy and pasting. You might like copy and paste from a template if you were sending out some reporting reminders or something like that, but that's not really any different than you would do with any other process. And so really just the getting the feedback back to the reviewer is the main time that you would copy and paste.
Great. Thanks, Tiffany. And that the topic about volume in an opportunity or competition. So this is a two-parter. How many different IRB forms do you have open right now?
I think we have 7 different types of things, but our main applications, there's just 3.
Great. And since you started, well, I should say, in a typical year, how many approval requests are you getting?
Um, about 200, around 200, and those are pretty evenly split between exemption applications and expedited applications. Our full review, we only get a handful of those a year. So that one I think has 37 right now, and we've had it up since 2019. So that one's still fine, but the other 2 are just a little bit sluggish in the loading just because of that volume. So I really like the idea. I think now of doing the new competition every fiscal year.
Yeah, and when admins at other institutions ask us, let's say they have a seed grant program or something that's open for some type of approval process that's always open. They ask us, should we just leave this open forever, or should we close it after a given period of time? We typically tell them it's best to close it on a fiscal year basis or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Because the reporting becomes easier as well, right? It's a defined period of time where you can pull the reports for.
Yeah, the only downside to that in my mind is that you have to remember which year it came in under, like especially with grants, because we might have a grant that's open for like 5 years, and so you want to pull the record on it, so you have to remember when it was originally submitted to find the competition that it's in. But I mean, it's not a deal breaker in any way.
Can I offer a tip while
Yeah.
we're there?
Yeah.
This is a nice conversation we're having. The reports tab in InfoReady, you'll see two links at the top. One is competitions and one is applications. If you click on applications, you can search across all the applications that have ever been submitted, and you can see.
Oh, that's awesome.
You can see which competition it was submitted
Okay.
to and the when and cycle.
That's fantastic. So you can search on any of the fields that would be in the grid, just like you would the normal grid. Is that right?
Yeah, the main field. So you could
Okay.
search the competition title, the
Awesome.
category, the applicant name, their
Okay.
application, that kind of stuff.
That's great.
That should help out in that regard.
Another thing I was going to say before we end is that I know that InfoReady is releasing the new form designer option tomorrow that will have like some intuitive things to where you can kind of branch out. So I plan to play around with that a little bit with the IRB stuff, particularly to see if that might work better for us. Like if somebody starts an application and then we walk them through classifying into one of the categories, and then that gives them a different application to submit based on that. So that's something I definitely plan to look into. So I encourage you all to do that as well, since the timing is so right to do that if you're getting ready to start looking at rolling out something for IRB purposes. I think that could potentially be a good way to do it. If you
Yeah.
want to have everything together. You might not want to.
Oh, someone just asked me, that's a great point. Right? There's lots of additional functionality in that form designer template for sure. There was a newsletter that went out today that had an article about it, if you're curious. So someone asked me here to repeat how they can search for applications when you don't remember which competition it's in. So if you're an administrator, you can click on the reports tab in the navigation bar across the top. That's going to take you to the reports page. And near the top of that page, there'll be two hyperlinked words. One is competitions and the other is applications. So by default, you land on competitions. If you click on applications, that's going to switch the view slightly, and there'll be a table there listing all of the applications that have ever been submitted to your InfoReady site. So you can search and filter based off of a few different data points, including applicant name, application title, competition, category, cycle, things like that. So quick way to narrow that down. If you use progress reports, by the way, you can pull progress reports across multiple competitions from that area as well. So that's some little extra tip for everybody. So Tiffany, a couple other questions for you.
Okay.
So about you said you document the emails.
Mm-hmm.
Do you save hard copies of everything, or just the email, the emails with the final decision?
We do not save anything. We use InfoReady to store all the records completely. So we do print the emails to PDF and then upload them, but we don't necessarily like organize those into a filing system. We just go back into InfoReady if we need any access to records. So it's a completely paperless system for us.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. On the notifications page, when you're editing a competition, do you check the box to automatically to automatically have your email address CC'd on all the award decisions? Great.
Yes, that's an excellent point. I'm glad you said that.
That way you don't have to remember. It's like,
Yeah, and I would even, besides just that, I would also do it for returning applications, because if you have feedback that you send back when you return an application and that's in your email, it's easier to follow up with the investigator if you just reply to that email, and that way they see it right there versus contacting them just blind and saying, on this date I sent you this feedback, have you looked at it yet? So I would BCC the admin for all of those things if I were you all.
Great, thanks for that tip. Here's another question for you. So, you're at EKU, and EKU faculty members and researchers are submitted forms. But sometimes they probably have co-PIs or collaborators outside of the university. Do they ever submit as well, or do they have to be, do you ever have collecting information about their collaborators in the system, or is it just strictly the EKU PI?
We do not review things that aren't led by an EKU PI. And so we don't have a reason for them to submit things, but they are sometimes listed in an application, like as an other investigator. And we also do the authorization agreements. And so if that's the case, it would flag for our IRB administrator to know that there needed to be an agreement between EKU and the other institution. And so she would note that during the application process, and then once it's approved, she would go back to our PI and say, you need to submit this authorization or reliance agreement request. And then she would reach out to the IRB admin at the other institution to see if they wanted to do an agreement to rely on our approval, which is normally how that would work. Occasionally somebody wants to review it separately, and that gets into a whole different discussion. But when it's an unfunded study, we can sometimes work that out. But generally, people will just rely on ours, if that's the case. And then we also do it the other way, where we are the co-investigator. And so someone at our institution would submit a request for a reliance agreement to rely on their approval versus the other way around. So both of those are options that we have set up within that competition for the reliance agreements.
Great, thanks for that additional context.
You're welcome.
I have lots. I probably have 10 other questions in my.
Oh, wow.
I'm not going to go through them all. Tiffany, I want to thank you for going through your process here. It was wonderful. I think people had lots of takeaways during that presentation. Rhonda, could you share the screen? We've got some other webinars coming up as well, right? We're always trying to provide InfoReady admins with resources on how they can do things in InfoReady, be it Tiffany's great overview of IRB processes, or as you can see on screen, we have a webinar next week going over the new form designer template. If you're a newish admin or you have other newer admins at your institution, there's a training refresher next month. So if you are interested in attending either of those, newsletter went out with that, but you can also find those at the InfoReadyCorp.com website. We'll also follow up with folks on this call to provide links to the webinar registration. If you have any other questions, there's a follow-up survey after the webinar closes, or you can contact anyone on the call here. I think everyone on the call is already an InfoReady user, so focus on the right side of the screen. And if you have any other comments, we'll be happy to chat with you. Once again, thanks, Tiffany. That was very insightful. It was taking us all the way through your process. Thanks everyone for your time. Have a great day.